Should a man be sent to jail and have to register as a sex offender for 10 years? Because at age 18, he had an underage girlfriend who sent him nude photos of herself? That's my subject on today's Fiamengo File. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. Vox magazine recently published an article that caught my eye with the title, "Me Too Must Avoid Carceral Feminism." Carceral feminism refers to feminist reliance on the state to punish men for what feminists call sexual violence. And the author of the article, Alex Press, warns feminists that, quote, directing the movement's energy into the criminal justice system doesn't build the power we need to stop sexual violence. It allies us with a system that is incompatible with liberation, end quote. Now, read selectively, this might seem to acknowledge that the criminal justice system treats accused men badly. But as you read on, you realize that the author's argument is not that the criminal justice system goes too far in punishing men for sexual misconduct, but that it doesn't go far enough to empower women and redistribute wealth. So there isn't any compassion for men in that article. But what about the very large number of men going to jail for behavior they never imagined to be criminal and didn't intend to be harmful? Feminists are big on calls to keep women out of prison, but the same concern is very rarely extended to men. Perhaps the most obvious discrepancy in how men and women are judged is evident in statutory rape cases. If a man has a sexual relationship with an underage girl, there is outrage and calls for jail time. But when an adult woman has a sexual relationship with an underage boy, there is rarely outrage, even when there is clear abuse of authority, as in cases involving female teachers, which we've seen quite a few of recently. A good example of leniency for female perpetrators is provided by the case of Lisa Lavoie, a 24-year-old Massachusetts teacher who seduced her 8th grade male student back in 2009. The two were found in a motel room after the boy's parents had reported him missing. Notably, the parents of the boy had already complained to the school about the inappropriate relationship that the teacher was having with their son, but the school didn't think it was serious, and nothing was done. They didn't even bother to talk to the teacher until 3 days later, when the parents filed a missing persons report. And even after Ms. Lavoie was arrested, the president of the school board was still talking about the sexual relationship between the two in very benign terms, calling it a, quote, bond that had developed through after-school social interaction. And we're also told in the newspaper report that the boy was, quote, unharmed after the motel incident. I cannot imagine an 8th grade girl whose male teacher took her to a motel room for sex being pronounced unharmed by news media. Ms. Lavoie eventually pleaded guilty to 3 counts of statutory rape, and in 2011, she was sentenced to probation time, no jail time. An illuminating window into cultural attitudes is provided by the judge's very sympathetic statement that he didn't think Ms. Lavoie would reoffend because her motivation was, quote, not sexual gratification, but, quote, concern for the boy's emotional well-being. Truly, it is impossible to imagine that being said about a 24-year-old man who had a sexual relationship with an 8th grade girl in his class. The teacher didn't have to register as a sex offender because of this very positive apprehension of her conduct. And I should mention that a year later, Ms. Lavoie was found guilty of violating her parole conditions after she reestablished a sexual relationship with a boy. And at that point, she was sentenced to 18 months in jail. But prior to that, only probation. More recently, in December 2017, a 34-year-old woman in LaGrange, Georgia, was found not guilty of statutory rape, despite testimony by 3 teenagers that she took them to a lake access point, bought them alcohol, supplied them with marijuana, and had sex with a 13-year-old boy when he was incapacitated. And she had admitted to the incident in a text message with one of the other teenagers. And she had failed a polygraph test administered by the police. But it seems the jury couldn't find it in their hearts to convict her, finding her guilty of a misdemeanor charge instead. More recently still, a 26-year-old middle school teacher in Florida will stand trial after having a months-long sexual relationship with a 14-year-old male student. She sent the student nude photos of herself and picked him up at his home for sex. She is charged with lewd and lascivious battery, which is equivalent to statutory rape, but it remains to be seen if she will be given any jail time. We are a society that has always found it very difficult to send women to jail. For comparative purposes, I want to turn to a recent case in Canada that has generated outrage at the supposedly lenient treatment of a convicted male sexual offender, in which many members of the public can't wait for this young man to be locked up. In January of 2018, now 21-year-old Connor Neurouter pled guilty to one count of sexual interference when he was 18 with a 13-year-old girl, and he was sentenced to 90 days in jail. What was most galling to the 70,000 plus people who have signed a petition about this case was that Connor's sentence was delayed until after he could complete his academic semester at the University of Calgary. According to my understanding of the law, it isn't that unusual for a sentence of less than 2 years to be delayed for a variety of reasons. But those who signed the petition to have Connor expelled from the University of Calgary felt that this was yet another example of the courts acting as, quote, the epitome of white male privilege, end quote. One of the women who signed the petition lamented that, quote, this man is a convicted, violent sexual predator whose chosen prey is children, that he has been able to use his enrollment at the University of Calgary to shield himself from his heinous crimes is nothing short of appalling, end quote. Another claimed it was, quote, sick. They are letting him continue living his life after raping someone, end quote. Another said that she was, quote, sick and tired of perverts going free. He should be castrated, not expelled, end quote. Another alleged that, quote, unless we are in a competition with the US for the most sexual assaults on a campus, rapists have no business in our schools. It's about time that Connor learned what no means, end quote. Well, as is likely common with petitions, the mob fury is based on many misrepresentations and complete ignorance of the facts of the case. I should note, by the way, that because of measures to protect the identity of the girl in the case, the facts we do have are somewhat sketchy. But we do know that Connor Neurouter is not a, quote, violent sexual predator whose chosen prey is children. He didn't rape the girl in this case, and there is no evidence at all of any prior history with underage girls. He and the 13-year-old that he was involved with never had sex. And although there is mention of his once putting his hands around the girl's neck, the context of that action isn't clear, and it doesn't seem to have caused harm or been seen as a threat. The majority of what happened between 18-year-old Connor and the 13-year-old girl was virtual. It took place through texts, something called Snapchat. They actually met only a handful of times. Neurouter was a big fish in the little pond of Kamloops, BC. He was a good-looking hockey player hoping to make a break into the big leagues, and the girl was, as far as I can tell, infatuated with him. 13-year-old girls have always been enamored of older teenage boys, and vice versa. Was this relationship abusive? It's hard to say from what we know. What is clear is that Connor's primary crime was, as the headline of the Vancouver Sun newspaper put it, to, quote, obtain sexual photos of the victim, end quote. That's a slightly misleading way of saying that NewRouter requested and received nude photos from the girl. In other words, she sent them to him. This is not quite the equivalent of a violent rape. According to the reports that I read, NewRouter at one point threatened to show the photos to others if the girl told about their relationship, as she was threatening to do mutual blackmail, it seems, and blackmail in which one of the parties, the girl, clearly had all the moral and legal power on her side. And at one point in the whole affair, a friend of the girl, a 14-year-old, began sending nude photos of herself to Connor also, supposedly in an attempt to, quote, distract him from her friend. It seems the two girls were competing for the attention of a local sports hero. I just don't see any evidence that Connor NewRouter constitutes a danger to the public. If anything, judging from the vicious bloodlust on evidence in that petition, members of the public are the danger to NewRouter and, by extension, to all accused young men. It is really shocking to see the depth of hatred unleashed by NewRouter's delayed sentence, and to witness tens of thousands of ordinary people whipped into a fury of obscenities and calls for castration merely because a young man had an underage girlfriend who sent him nude photos. He is going to jail. He will register as a sex offender for 10 years, and that's not enough for them. What would be enough? The death penalty? That he be torn limb from limb in some kind of public spectacle? I guess so. As one male commentator said, reading from his feminist script, quote, justice should be victim-centered, particularly with reference to sex offenses. Another agreed, saying, we need to take sexual assault seriously. Men be warned. In other words, carceral feminism. Lock up all the men, no matter what they did or didn't do. Compassion for girls and women, none for boys or men. Read the NewRouter petition and get a glimpse of how hideous it is.